Number 8. Sheila Davalloo and Nelson Sessler. Pharmaceutical research scientist Sheila Davalloo married Paul Christos in 2000 after her first husband caught her having an affair with him. The once passionate romance soon fizzled out, and in 2001, Davalloo met and began sleeping with her co-worker Nelson Sessler. Sessler had no idea Davalloo was married, and she wanted to keep it that way. To maintain her double life, she convinced her husband that her mentally ill brother periodically came to stay with her at the couple's home outside New York City, and that his presence would upset the troubled young man. Christos stayed elsewhere during these visits, apparently unaware that his wife was actually having her boyfriend over. In 2002, Sessler ended what he thought was a summer fling with Davalloo to pursue a relationship with another co-worker named Annalisa Raimondo. They became a couple and began living together, unaware that Davalloo was boiling over with jealousy. One night, Davalloo broke into Raimondo's apartment with sinister intentions. She then bludgeoned and stabbed the woman to death. Afterward, she dialed 911 from a payphone, pretending to be a neighbor, and she said she overheard an attack. Davalloo gave a fake description of a male suspect, and the case quickly became a whodunit. Meanwhile, her affair with Sessler resumed, but there was one more person to remove from the equation: Davalloo's husband. So she stabbed Christos twice one day after tricking him into thinking she wanted intimacy, but he somehow convinced her to drive him to the emergency room. Before taking off, Davalloo stabbed Christos one more time. Miraculously, though, he survived, and there were witnesses to the attack. Davalloo was convicted of attempted murder and assault and was sentenced to 25 years to life. By then, detectives had connected her to Raimondo's murder, and after building a solid case, they took it to trial. She was found guilty and was sentenced to an additional 50 years in Connecticut, where she'll be transferred after serving her first sentence in New York. Number 7. Megan Hall. In late 2022, a whistleblower in Laverne, Tennessee, leaked information to the city's mayor about inappropriate contact between officers at the local police department. At the center of the scandal was 26-year-old married officer Megan Hall, who was accused of having affairs with several of her colleagues. There was also a rumor about a so-called Girls Gone Wild party at an officer's house. Hall initially denied any misconduct, but she eventually confessed to having intimate encounters and sharing explicit photos with 7 male officers, both on and off duty while on city property. She also described playing strip card games, sharing foot fetish photos, and attempting to persuade her husband, who also works in law enforcement, to swap partners with their colleagues. During questioning, Hall said that her marriage was falling apart and that it caused her to crack. And once she took that first leap, her behavior spiraled further and further out of control. 5 officers were fired, including Hall, and 3 were suspended, amounting to roughly 12% of the entire police force. The rest of the officers were required to undergo retraining on the agency's rules and expectations. Police Chief Burrell Chip Davis denied any prior knowledge of the affairs when he was questioned during a third-party investigation. But photos, videos, and text messages on his burner phone proved otherwise. And as a result, he was fired from his position. Hall's husband, Jedediah, has reportedly made the strong and arguably foolish decision to stand by his wife. The couple has said they plan to start counseling in order to rekindle their seemingly broken relationship. Number 6. Mark Jensen and Kelly Labonte. 40-year-old mother of 2, Julie Jensen, was found dead in her bed in 1998 at the Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin home she shared with her husband Mark and their 2 children. The next day, the neighbors showed police a note she'd written to them recently, which said that if anything bad happened to her, Mark was responsible. In the note, Julie mentioned a brief affair she had, which Mark had never forgiven her for. She also wrote that she suspected him of cheating and noted that she found it odd how he'd been pressuring her to drink alcohol with him recently. Julie predicted that Mark might try to kill her and claim she took her own life, which is exactly what he did when toxicology results came back, proving that his wife had been poisoned with antifreeze. Mark behaved strangely after Julie's death. He laughed and joked during her funeral and almost immediately packed all her things into garbage bags and got rid of them, removing any trace of her from their home. And as it turned out, Mark was having an affair with his co-worker Kelly Labonte. It started months before Julie's death, and Mark was suspiciously quick to have Kelly move in after she passed away. The couple then married the following year. In 2002, authorities finally felt they had enough evidence to try Mark for murder. He maintained his innocence and stood by his claims that Julie took her own life, despite overwhelming evidence that he'd meticulously planned to poison his wife to death. After years of delays, Mark was convicted of Julie's murder in 2008. He was then sentenced to life in prison as a result. However, he won a retrial in 2021 after bombarding the courts with appeal after appeal. And in early 2023, the jury again found him guilty for a second time. He's currently scheduled to be resentenced in April of 2023. And not surprisingly, Kelly Labonte divorced Mark after his 2008 conviction and has since remarried. Number 5. Robert Teles and Roberta Lee Kennett. As a longtime reporter for the Las Vegas Review-Journal, 69-year-old veteran reporter Jeff German had made his fair share of enemies. But it still came as a shock to his friends and colleagues when he was found stabbed to death in his yard in 2022. The suspect's vehicle was captured on surveillance footage, along with video of the perpetrator approaching German's home and attacking him in broad daylight. But these visuals alone weren't enough to provide police with any solid leads. The Review-Journal launched its own investigation into the murder. Based on the sloppiness of the crime, the team speculated that the suspect was an amateur killer rather than a seasoned criminal. While reviewing German's social media, they identified former Clark County Public Administrator Robert Teles as a person of interest. German had written a series of brutal articles about Teles, exposing his extramarital affair with his co-worker Roberta Lee Kennett and revealing evidence of workplace hostility and mismanagement. Teles allegedly blamed German for ruining his political career and his marriage, suggesting that he had plenty of motives to kill the journalist. Members of the Review-Journal drove past Teles' home and saw a car in the driveway that looked identical to the one in the surveillance footage of the crime. Detectives acted on the lead and connected Teles to the scene through DNA evidence. He was consequently charged with murder and remains behind bars while awaiting trial, which is scheduled for September of 2023. Number 4. Ann Miller and Daryl Willard. When an AIDS researcher from Raleigh, North Carolina named Eric Miller collapsed during a night out with his wife Ann and some of her co-workers in 2000, the source of his sudden illness was a mystery to doctors. That happened again just days later, and by the time doctors figured out that someone had poisoned him with arsenic, Eric was barely clinging to life. He passed away, and Ann naturally became a person of interest in the case. Investigators discovered that Ann was having an affair with her married co-worker Daryl Willard, and that the pair went on a romantic getaway to Chicago just days before Eric's death. They also found an arsenic compound called sodium cacodylate at Ann's workstation, but they didn't have enough evidence to make any arrests at that point. Willard took his own life in 2001 after police executed a search warrant on his home. He left behind a note apologizing to his family and maintaining his innocence in Eric's murder. His lawyer refused to reveal any incriminating information about Willard, citing attorney-client privilege, but the state's Supreme Court finally forced him to give it up in 2004 after a lengthy court battle. The information gleaned from the records provided enough for authorities to finally charge Ann in connection with Eric's death. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was consequently sentenced to 25 to 31 years in prison. Number 3. Maria Cuellar and David Miranda. When Maria Cuellar separated from her husband Vicente and pursued a divorce, he refused to accept that their relationship was over. He began stalking his estranged wife, who worked as a school bus driver in El Paso County, Texas, and discovered that she was dating her co-worker, auto mechanic David Miranda. In December of 2015, Maria's body was found in the trunk of a burning car, and Miranda's remains were discovered in an orchard. Both of them had been shot to death. Vicente told detectives that he was with a friend, Alan Frere, at the time of the murders. When the police questioned both men, they were suspected of lying. Cell phone records later revealed that the victims and suspects were all near the orchard where Miranda was killed at around the same time neighbors reported hearing gunshots. Investigators also suspected Vicente and Frere of committing the murders together because one of them would have needed a getaway vehicle to flee the scene after torching the car Maria's body was found in. Vicente also denied having marital problems, but Maria's co-workers told a much different story, painting him out as cruel, possessive, and uncontrollably jealous. They also claimed to have witnessed Vicente following and surveilling Maria and Miranda shortly before their deaths. Authorities charged Vicente and Frere with capital murder, and they were both found guilty despite their adamant claims of innocence. They were each handed a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Both men appealed their convictions, but the court upheld the rulings. Number 2. Katrina Smith and Guy Gabriel. When 30-year-old Katrina Smith's marriage to her 44-year-old husband Todd began to fall apart, she vented to her married co-worker and friend Guy Gabriel. The human resources coordinator was supporting Todd and his 3 children from a previous relationship, even though everyone in their lives was under the impression that he was the breadwinner and a respectable family man. In reality, he'd landed himself in the center of some serious fraud allegations after allegedly screwing over his business partners. Todd was also controlling and insecure, and Katrina eventually got fed up. In 2012, she moved out of their shared home in Machesney Park, Illinois, and started living at a friend's apartment. By then, she and Guy Gabriel were entangled in a full-blown affair. Given his possessive ways, it's not surprising that Todd refused to accept that their marriage was over. Instead, he attached a tracking device to Katrina's car. Shortly after separating from her husband, the woman mysteriously vanished. It was also Todd who reported Katrina missing, claiming that she'd gone to the grocery store and never returned. He told police that they still lived together and that his wife was house-sitting at the condo, which detectives quickly discovered was a lie. A few days later, Katrina's car was found abandoned a few miles from her home. In it was a handmade card from Todd, begging her to reconsider working out their marriage and saying that he was terrified that she would find someone else. Investigators also found cell phone evidence showing that Todd was obsessively trying to get Katrina back. 3 weeks after she vanished, a fisherman found her body. She'd been brutally bludgeoned to death, and by that point, detectives had already found a baseball bat with Katrina's blood on it in Todd's garage, as well as the computer program he was using to track her whereabouts with a GPS device on her car. Prosecutors speculated that Todd found out about Katrina's affair through the information gleaned from the tracking device. They believed that Katrina likely told him she wanted a divorce, at which point he completely lost control of his anger and beat her to death with the bat. The defense pointed the finger at Guy Gabriel, citing his history of domestic violence and accusing him of being a homewrecker who led Katrina astray from her marriage with sinister intentions. But the jury didn't buy it, and in 2017, Todd was found guilty of first-degree murder. And as a punishment for the brutal crime, he was sentenced to 59 years in prison. And at number 1, Carolyn Warmus and Paul Solomon. Late one evening, back in 1989, schoolteacher Paul Solomon arrived at his home in Greenburgh, New York to find his wife, 40-year-old Betty Jean, dead from multiple gunshot wounds. Detectives confirmed Paul's alibi with the help of witnesses who vouched for his whereabouts, including his mistress, 28-year-old Carolyn Warmus. Solomon met Warmus, the daughter of an extremely wealthy multi-millionaire from Detroit, over a year earlier while teaching at the same school. However, the affair ended within months of Betty Jean's murder. Unwilling to accept that their relationship was over, Warmus became obsessed with Solomon. She tried repeatedly to get him back, but he wasn't interested. Her behavior further derailed when she followed Solomon to Puerto Rico and discovered that he was traveling with a new girlfriend. A few months later, Warmus suffered a nervous breakdown and was hospitalized for 7 days. By then, Solomon's new girlfriend had obtained an order of protection against her. Investigators quietly watched the drama unfold as Warmus moved straight to the top of their suspect list. After discovering that she'd bought a gun matching the one used to kill Betty Jean shortly before the murder, prosecutors charged her with second-degree murder. Her first trial in 1991 ended in a hung jury, but she was convicted the following year at the conclusion of her second trial. Warmus was paroled in 2019 after serving 27 years of a 25-to-life sentence. Unlike many other parolees, who are typically expected to admit their wrongdoings and show remorse in order to be considered for release, she managed to gain her freedom while maintaining her innocence in the crime. In all fairness, evidence that has come to light since the trial suggests that Paul was having multiple affairs and gained a lot of money from Betty Jean's life insurance payout. For those reasons alone, it's not hard to wonder if someone other than Warmus could be responsible for the crime. Would you rather deal with the awkwardness of working with someone you had a fling with after it ended with hard feelings, or have your current partner's ex as a boss? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.